speak to Aviation Expert Guy Leitch, who is on standby just to make sense of what is taking place. Mr. Leitch, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Let's just start firstly with, the fact that right now lots of questions are being asked, but when you look at that footage, it does appear to have been struggling somewhat at takeoff there, with some experts so far suspecting that there could have been some engine failure or something else going on there. When you look at the footage and this particular incident, I know it's speculation at this stage, but what do you think possibly happened?
Nice to be with you. No, at this stage, it would be pure speculation to suggest engine failure. And bear in mind that this Boeing 787, as all modern jetliners are, can climb very well on one engine. So to have lost an engine on takeoff should not be a cause for a crash at all. Fortunately, it looks like the tail has survived, the tail structure has survived intact, and that is where the two so-called black boxes are. They're actually orange, and that will hopefully give us the details within a month as to what actually happened to the aircraft.
Now, when you then look at the fact that right now, especially when we're hearing from our correspondent saying that aviation safety is now going to be in sharp focus, and the fact that in India now, those are some of the questions that are being asked. What do we know about this particular aircraft? It's known as the 7878 Dreamliner.
Correct. So the 787 is Boeing's, most recent aircraft, and it's had an impeccable safety record. It hasn't had any fatalities. It hasn't had any hull losses in the 14 years since it's been in service. So that really is a huge feather in Boeing's cap. And fortunately, this is just another disaster for Boeing. I noticed that the stock price, the share price, has taken an 8% hit on the news. We don't know what happened, but the reality is that it either is the failure of the aircraft, or it's a pilot failure, or a crew failure, if you like. And I need to point out that there has been a long struggle within India, and particularly Air India, to improve its safety record. It had its last fatal crash in 2020, which is just 5 years ago, and there 17 people were killed. That's not acceptable to have two crashes within 5 years on a major airline, a so-called flag carrier.
And Guy, I'm going to ask you to stay with us just for a second. These are live visuals there as the site inspection continues, and we do understand that an Air India Boeing 787 Dreamliner plane crashing close to an airport there. We heard from Nihapunya. It crashed into a densely populated residential area. Lots of concern about fatalities at this stage. Still trying to piece together as to what could have happened here, and you do have, of course, varying suggestions from experts who are watching this particular story develop. But it's believed that this particular plane was carrying around 242 people on board, and some reports suggesting that rescue workers were saying that between 30 and 35 bodies had been recovered from the crash site. And when you listen to Niha as well, she does say that hospitals are speaking of charred remains that they now having to contend with, as far as getting some DNA testing going and identification process is concerned. But at the same time, it is, of course, a race against time to try and figure out what may have happened here. So as you're watching these visuals of the scene there, lots of people around there will probably be asking themselves questions as to what happened here. And we heard in the morning that the airport, and that is the Ahmedabad airport, was closed, and all flight operations also being suspended until further notice. And Guy, as I bring you back into this conversation, when you look at the fact that it crashed into this densely populated area, I suppose one could even say that, it's not now going to be the focus only on this particular aircraft, but it's going to shift into this building as well, because according to our correspondent, around 200 people would have been there. So in terms of fatalities, you're now having to deal with what may have happened to people on board, but also the people in that building.
Absolutely correct. The aircraft crashed into some sort of medical college, doctor's college, and there are reports already of at least 5 fatalities from the people on the ground, in other words, not in the aircraft. And I have to say, without risk of speculation, that looking at the remains of the aircraft, I am extremely doubtful as to whether anyone would have survived from the passengers or the crew.
And when you look at Boeing, for example, because when you're watching several reports, you see, again, the focus on Boeing, and we know that it leads the global aircraft market alongside Europe's Airbus. But over time, in recent years, Boeing has come under intense scrutiny when it comes to its safety records. We saw some of the jets being grounded for almost 2 years after a crash killed 189 people. And this is in Indonesia around October 2018. And then 157 people killed in Ethiopia 5 months later. So in January last year, we then saw, of course, the door plug being, just flying off there mid-air during an Alaska airline flight. One wonders, though, when you look at the company, what impact has this had on its reputation?
Yeah, well, Boeing was doing its very best to try and re-establish its reputation as being an airplane builder of excellence. The accusation had been that since the McDonnell Douglas buyout, it had been driven by bottom line profits and not by engineering excellence. And then, of course, the 2 crashes of the Boeing 737 MAX 8, in a sense, reinforced that, and was perhaps almost the final nail of the coffin was the door plug from the Alaskans airline flight. So Boeing is still incredibly vulnerable. And just when it was showing signs of really turning around and getting back into its former reputation, and having this particular crash is an enormous setback to it. But I must re-emphasize that this is not a Boeing MAX aircraft. This is a Boeing 787. It's substantially larger, and it has had an absolutely impeccable safety record ever since it first started flying.
Just before I let you go, how critical will the black boxes be in order to try and piece together what would have happened here?
Well, as I said, I don't believe that the flight crew probably survived this being at the front end of the aircraft. Fortunately, the black boxes look as though they probably will have survived. And that'll give us... I'm particularly interested in the flight data recorder because there are 2. There's a cockpit voice recorder which records the conversations within the cockpit, and then there's the black box that is the flight data recorder, which records the position of all the controls and the functioning of all key elements such as the engines or the controls and so on. I think that'll tell us whether the aircraft was correctly configured or not, and whether the engines were producing full power. Because from what we can see from the video, those are the 2 most primary suspects at this stage.
Guy Leitch, aviation expert, thank you so much for helping us try to piece together what could have happened there. Appreciate your time this afternoon.